I want to tell you about something that happened to me. Not because I think you'll believe it. I'm not even sure I believe all of it myself. But because I've been carrying it for 8 months now. And carrying things alone has a weight that changes you. I can feel it in how I sleep, in how I don't sleep, in how I stand at my kitchen window at night and watch the dark windows of the apartment across from mine, waiting for something I can't name. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll start where it makes sense. I'll start with the job. I took the position at Greyhaven Psychiatric Institute in October. Night shift, 11 to 7. Administrative intake and records management for the overnight rotation. It wasn't the kind of job you pursue. It was the kind of job that finds you after everything else has quietly fallen apart. I'd been unemployed for 3 months. Before that, I was doing data entry for a logistics company that went under without warning. Before that, it doesn't matter. The point is that by the time Greyhaven called me back, I had $340 in my checking account and a landlord who had started leaving notes on my door that weren't angry exactly, but had a specific patient kind of firmness that felt worse than anger. So when the HR woman, Linda, I think, or Lydia, told me the overnight position was available immediately and that it paid $19.50 an hour with a shift differential, I said yes before she finished the sentence. She paused after I said it, just a half second too long. Then she said, "Good, we'll get you started Monday." I remember thinking the pause was strange, but I was tired, and desperate people don't dwell on pauses. Greyhaven sits on the eastern edge of the city, past the industrial corridor where the old textile mills used to be. You take Route 9 until it narrows, then follow the signs past a stretch of nothing. Empty lots, a boarded-up gas station, a long chain-link fence that borders a drainage field. The hospital appears gradually, the way things do in fog. First the parking structure, then the administrative wing, all brown brick and narrow windows, then the main building, 5 stories of poured concrete and institutional glass, the kind of architecture that doesn't want you to feel anything at all. I'd later learn that the original facility was built in 1971. It had been expanded twice, once in the 80s, once in the mid-90s. The East Wing, which is the part that matters, was added during the second expansion. It housed what they called the Extended Observation Unit, 32 beds, long-term patients, the ones who didn't get better and didn't get worse, the ones who just stayed. That wing had been closed since 2019. I was told this during orientation briefly, the way you're told where the fire exits are, just information, not a story. Marcus, the floor supervisor who walked me through the building on my first night, mentioned it while we passed through the main corridor on the second floor. He pointed to a set of double doors at the far end, the kind with wire-reinforced glass and heavy push bars. A plastic sign above them read, "East Wing, authorized personnel only." The doors were shut, not locked with a padlock or anything dramatic, just shut. "That's the old unit," Marcus said. "Been closed a while. Nothing back there but dust and old equipment." "What happened?" I asked. He didn't look at me. He was already walking. "Budget cuts," he said. I nodded. That was enough of an answer. Budget cuts explained everything in places like this. Budget cuts were the universal solvent for questions you didn't want to sit with. We moved on. He showed me the records room, the intake desk, the break room with its microwave that smelled faintly of burnt soup, the bathroom with the lock that stuck. He introduced me to the other overnight staff, 2 nurses, Denise and Paul, a security guard named Gerald who looked like he'd been awake for a decade, and a janitor named Ray who shook my hand without smiling and said, "You'll get used to it." I didn't ask what he meant. People say things like that. It usually just means the coffee is bad. The first 2 weeks were uneventful in the way that overnight work always is. You enter a building when the world is awake and you leave when it's waking up again. And the hours in between exist in a kind of temporal margin. Not quite real, not quite a dream. Just a long fluorescent hum between one version of yourself and the next. My job was straightforward. Process intake paperwork for any overnight admissions. Rare, maybe 1 or 2 a week. Update patient files with nursing notes. Scan documents. Maintain the filing system in the records room, which was a windowless space on the second floor that smelled like old paper and carpet adhesive. The filing cabinets were the old metal kind, army green, and they made a sound when you opened them that reminded me of something breathing. I worked alone, mostly. Denise would drop off charts around 1 or 2 in the morning. Paul might stop by to ask if I needed anything. Gerald walked the halls on a rotation, his footsteps steady and unhurried, the kind of rhythm that becomes invisible after a few nights. Ray mopped the corridors. The building settled into itself. I settled into it too. I started noticing things in the 3rd week. Not big things. Not the kind of things you'd report or even mention. Just textures, small sensory details that didn't quite match the pattern. The first one was the lights. The East Wing corridor, the sealed one past those double doors, had a row of overhead fluorescents visible through the wire glass. I could see them when I walked to the restroom, which was at the far end of the second-floor hallway, about 40 feet from the doors. The lights were always off. Of course they were. The wing was closed. There was no reason for them to be on. Except on my 3rd Wednesday. Around 3:15 in the morning, I glanced toward those doors on my way back from the restroom, and one of the lights was on. Not flickering, not the faint glow of emergency lighting. A steady, full fluorescent panel. The kind of flat white light that makes everything look like evidence. I stopped. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, staring through the wire glass. The corridor beyond the doors was visible in fragments. A stretch of linoleum, a section of wall, the edge of what might have been a door frame. The light was coming from somewhere past the first turn. It was steady, unblinking. I went back to my desk. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself it was a timer, or a maintenance issue, or that the lights in old buildings do things. They cycle, they surge. I'd worked in enough aging offices to know that electrical systems have their own logic, and that logic doesn't always make sense to the people inside the building. The next night, the light was off. The night after that, it was on again. Same time. Same steady glow. I started checking, not obsessively, just glancing. Each time I walked to the restroom, I kept a loose mental tally. Over the next 2 weeks, the light was on roughly every other night, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always the same panel, or at least the same section of corridor. I mentioned it to Gerald one night while he was refilling his thermos in the break room. "Hey," I said, "have you noticed the lights in the East Wing come on sometimes?" Gerald poured his coffee. He didn't look up. "Old wiring," he said. "It's pretty regular, though, every other night or so." Old wiring does that. He screwed the cap on his thermos. Then he looked at me, not at my face exactly, but at a point just past my left ear, and said, "I wouldn't spend too much time down at that end of the hall." He left before I could ask why. The second thing was the charts. Part of my job was updating patient records with time-stamped nursing notes. Denise or Paul would bring me a stack of charts each night, usually around 1 or 2 a.m., and I'd enter the notes into the system, scan the handwritten pages, and file the originals. It was monotonous, precise work, the kind that keeps your hands busy while your mind floats. I was good at it. I have a decent memory for names and numbers, the kind of low-level pattern recognition that makes you useful in clerical work and useless at parties. So when I started seeing names I didn't recognize, I noticed. It happened gradually. A chart would appear in the stack with a patient ID I hadn't processed before. The notes would be current, dated that night, signed by Denise or Paul. But the patient name wouldn't match anyone on the active census. I'd check the system. No record. I'd check the paper census posted at the nurse's station. No match. The first time, I assumed it was a new admission I'd missed. The second time, I figured it was a transfer from another floor. The third time, I asked Denise, "Hey, I've got a chart here for a patient named Ilara Voss. I can't find her in the system." Denise was writing something. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her expression was the same as always, pleasant, professional, mildly tired. But there was a delay, maybe a full second between my question and her response, like a translation was happening somewhere behind her eyes. "Oh," she said, "that's probably a filing error. Just set it aside. I'll take care of it. It's got tonight's date on it. Your signature." "I'll take care of it," she said again. Same tone, same pleasantness. She held out her hand for the chart, and I gave it to her. She put it in her bag, not in the filing tray, not back in the stack, in her personal bag, the canvas tote she carried her lunch in. I didn't ask about it again. But I started paying attention. Over the next several weeks, I found 7 charts for patients who didn't exist in the system. The names were all different. The notes were all current. The handwriting was always Denise's or Paul's. I'd learned to recognize both. The notes described routine observations, vital signs, medication administration, sleep patterns, behavioral notes, normal clinical language. Nothing alarming in the content itself. What alarmed me was that the patients weren't real, or weren't supposed to be. I want to be careful here. I want to be honest about what I knew, and when I knew it. Because the mind does things at 3 a.m. that it wouldn't do at noon. It fills gaps. It builds connections out of static. I was tired. I was always tired. Overnight work doesn't just take your sleep. It takes your confidence in your own perception. After a few weeks, you start second-guessing everything. Did I really see that? Did she really say that? Was that sound real? Or was it the building? Or was it me? So when I tell you what I noticed next, I want you to understand that I questioned all of it. I questioned it then, and I question it now, but I'm telling you anyway, because the questioning hasn't made it go away. The intercom system at Greyhaven was old, analog, the kind with ceiling-mounted speakers and a central console at the nurse's station. Most of the speakers worked, some didn't. The ones in the East Wing obviously were supposed to be inactive. No power to that section, no reason for announcements. But twice in my 5th week, I heard something. Not words, exactly. Not a clear voice. More like the ghost of a voice. The shape of speech without the content. A low, breathy modulation that came from the speaker nearest to the East Wing doors. It lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds each time. Then, silence. The first time, I was alone in the hallway. I stopped, listened, heard nothing more, and convinced myself it was interference. Radio bleed. A cell signal bouncing off old wiring. It happens. The second time, Ray was mopping about 20 feet away. I heard the sound and looked at him. He was looking at the speaker, too. We made eye contact for exactly 1 second. Then he dipped his mop back in the bucket and kept working. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But I saw his hands. They were steady. He wasn't startled. He'd heard it before. I started staying alert in a way that felt different from curiosity. It was more like the feeling you get when you're walking through an unfamiliar neighborhood at night and your body starts cataloging exits. Not panic, just readiness. A quiet physical awareness that something in your environment hasn't declared itself yet. The things I noticed accumulated. The wheelchairs stored in the alcove near the east wing doors. There were 4 of them, old models, folded and leaning against the wall. I passed them every night. On 3 separate occasions, I noticed they had been rearranged. Not dramatically. 1 would be turned slightly, or 2 would be in a different order. Small changes. The kind you'd miss if you weren't looking. The kind you'd dismiss if you were. The ventilation. Greyhaven's HVAC system was old and loud. A constant low-frequency hum that became a kind of white noise after a few shifts. I stopped hearing it the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. But sometimes, around 2 or 3 a.m., it would stop. Not wind down, not cycle off gradually. Just stop, like someone had pressed a button. The silence was enormous. It would last maybe 30 seconds, sometimes a minute. Then the system would resume, as if nothing had happened. The first time it happened, I felt my chest tighten. The absence of the sound was louder than the sound itself. It was like the building was holding its breath. Footsteps. This one is harder to explain because overnight buildings have sounds. They settle, they creak, pipes expand and contract. I understood that, but the footsteps I heard, twice in my 6th week, once in my 7th, were rhythmic, measured, the pace of someone walking with purpose down a corridor. They came from the direction of the east wing. They lasted maybe 15 or 20 seconds, then they stopped. I never saw anyone. I started looking into the east wing closure, not aggressively. I didn't file FOIA requests or dig through archived newspapers. I just started asking questions, casual ones, the way you ask about the weather or a local restaurant. I wanted to see how people responded. The responses were remarkably consistent, which is to say they were all some version of nothing. Oh, that closed ages ago, before my time. Budget stuff, I think, or maybe renovations that never happened. I don't really know the detail. You'd have to ask admin about that. Nobody was rude. Nobody told me to stop asking. They just deflected, gently, smoothly. The way you guide a conversation away from something without the other person realizing you've done it. It was like trying to hold water. The topic just slipped through. The only person who gave me anything close to a real answer was Ray. It was a Tuesday night, around 4 a.m. He was emptying trash cans in the records room. I was at my desk. The building was as quiet as it ever got, which is to say the fluorescents were buzzing, and the ventilation was humming, and the rain was tapping on the windows with the kind of patience that rain has when it's been going for hours. "Ray," I said, "what actually happened in the East Wing?" He tied off a trash bag, slowly, deliberately. Then he stood there for a moment, holding the bag, looking at the floor. "People got sick," he said. "Patients. People." He picked up the bag and walked to the door. Then he stopped. The ones in there, the long-term ones, they were already gone, in a way. You know, not dead, but not coming back. And the people who took care of them, they started... He paused, adjusted his grip on the bag. They started acting like the patients, little by little, not crazy, just quiet, too quiet, doing things by routine even when the routine didn't make sense anymore, like the building got inside them. He looked at me then. really looked at me. "I'd be careful about how many nights you spend here," he said. "Some places don't let go of people easy." Then he left. I heard his footsteps receding down the hall, the squeak of his cart, the muffled sound of a door opening and closing, then the hum of the building filling the space where his words had been. I should tell you about my apartment now, because that's where the title comes from, and because what happened there is the thing I think about most, more than the lights, more than the charts, more than any of it. I still live, in a small one-bedroom in a building on Keswick Street, 3rd floor. The building is old but maintained, the kind of place where the hallways smell like laundry detergent and the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor's televisions. My apartment faces east, and the bedroom window looks directly across a narrow courtyard to the building next door. Same height, same brick, same rows of windows. My window and the opposite apartment's window are maybe 30 feet apart. The apartment across from mine had been vacant since before I moved in. The landlord of my building mentioned it once, something about the owner being in a dispute with the property management company. The unit was empty, no furniture, no curtains, just bare windows and the faint gray geometry of an unoccupied room. But there were plants on the windowsill. 3 of them. I noticed them my first week. Small pots, evenly spaced. The kind of nondescript green plants you see in office lobbies. They sat on the interior sill, visible through the glass. I didn't think much of them. Maybe the previous tenant left them. Maybe someone was storing them there. Plants are not inherently interesting. What became interesting was that someone was watering them. I noticed because I keep strange hours. I leave for work at 10:30 p.m. I get home around 7:45 a.m. I sleep from about 9 to 4 or 5 in the afternoon, depending on how exhausted I am. I eat something. I stare at the wall. I get ready for work. In the gaps between these activities, I sometimes stand at my bedroom window and look at nothing, the way you do when you're too tired to read and too awake to sleep. The plants were always green, always upright. In 5 months, they never wilted, never browned, never drooped. Someone was caring for them. And eventually, I saw who. It was a Tuesday evening, around 6:30. I was standing at my window, eating cereal, watching the courtyard go dark. The apartment across from mine was dim, as always. Then a figure appeared. Not dramatically, not suddenly. They were just there, standing near the window, holding a small watering can or cup, tilting it over each plant in turn. The movements were slow, precise, almost ritualistic. Left plant, middle plant, right plant, a pause after each one. Then the figure stepped back from the window and was gone. I couldn't see details. The light was wrong. Their apartment was darker than the courtyard, so the figure was mostly silhouette, medium height, thin, moving with a kind of deliberateness that didn't look hurried or casual. It looked practiced. The next evening, same time, same routine. And the next, every evening between 6:15 and 6:45, the figure appeared, watered the 3 plants, and withdrew. Same pace, same order, same mechanical precision. Never a light on in the apartment, never a sound, never any other sign of occupancy, no mail, no movement of curtains, no cooking smells, nothing. Just the plants. Just the watering. Just the figure. I told myself it was the owner, or a caretaker, or a friend of the previous tenant who'd agreed to maintain the plants. There were rational explanations, and I held onto them the way you hold onto a railing when the stairs are icy, not because you're falling, but because you might. But then I started working at Grey Haven, and the things I noticed there began to rhyme with the things I noticed at home, not in content, in texture, in the feeling of watching something that operates on a schedule it shouldn't have, something that performs a routine after the reason for the routine has ended. Someone watering plants in an empty apartment. Nurses filing charts for patients who don't exist. Lights coming on in a wing that closed 7 years ago. The same devotion to procedure. The same absence of reason. The same quiet, persistent continuation of something that should have stopped. In my 8th week at Greyhaven, I did something I shouldn't have. It was a Thursday night, 3:20 a.m. Gerald was on the far side of the building doing his rounds. Denise was in the break room. Paul was on the 3rd floor with a patient. Ray had gone home early. Stomach bug, he said, though he looked more tired than sick. I walked to the east wing doors. I stood in front of them. Through the wire glass, the corridor was dark. No lights tonight. Just the faint gray wash of whatever ambient light leaked in from the hallway behind me. I pushed the door. It opened. Not locked. Not barred. Not sealed. It opened with the same resistance as any heavy institutional door. The weight of the thing itself. The hydraulic closer hissing softly as it swung inward. The air that came out was different. Not dramatically. Not a horror movie gust of cold wind. Just different. Staler. Thicker. The way air gets in a room that's been closed for a long time but not quite long enough to go fully dead. There was a faint smell underneath the staleness. Not decay. Something chemical. Antiseptic, maybe. But old. Like the memory of cleaning rather than the act of it. I stepped inside. The corridor was long and straight. The same as every other corridor in the building. Linoleum floor. Off-white walls. Acoustic ceiling tiles. Doors on both sides, evenly spaced. The doors were closed. Some had small windows, some didn't. The ones with windows were dark. I walked about 30 feet in. My footsteps sounded different here, sharper, more contained, as if the walls were closer than they looked. The fluorescents were off, but the emergency lighting, small, dim strips near the floor, was active. I could see enough to move, enough to read the room numbers on the doors. 201E, 202E, 203E. I stopped at 204E because the door was slightly open. Not wide open, just ajar. Maybe 2 inches. Enough to see a thin vertical slice of the room beyond. I couldn't see much. The edge of a bed frame. A section of floor. What might have been a chair. The room was dark, but it was warm. The air coming through the gap in the door was warm. Not stale warm. Warm like a room where the heat was on. Warm like a room that was being maintained. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough that I became aware of my own breathing, and then aware of another sound beneath it. A low, rhythmic noise that I couldn't identify. Not mechanical, not the building, something organic, soft, steady. It could have been breathing. I did not open the door. I turned around and walked back to the double doors. I pushed through them. I went to my desk. I sat down. I opened a chart and started entering data. My hands were steady. I don't know why I didn't go back. After that night, things changed. Not in the building, in me, or maybe in how the building responded to me. I don't know how to separate those two things anymore. Denise started giving me fewer charts. The ghost patients, that's what I called them in my head. The names that didn't match the census stopped appearing in my stack. But I noticed that Denise still carried charts with her when she left the nurses' station at 2 a.m. She'd walk toward the east end of the corridor with a small stack under her arm and return 20 minutes later without them. I never asked where she went. Paul began avoiding me. Not obviously. He still said good morning, still asked if I needed anything. But the questions became shorter. The eye contact became briefer. He started taking a different route to the break room, one that didn't pass my desk. I noticed because the new route was longer and made no practical sense unless the purpose was to not walk past me. Gerald changed too in a subtler way. His rounds became more precise. He walked the same path at the same time each night, but his pace slowed when he passed the east wing doors. Not a stop, a deceleration, a half-second of hesitation that he covered with a sip from his thermos or a glance at his phone. But I saw it. The way his body registered the doors and then performed the act of not registering them. And the sounds continued. The intercom static, the footsteps, the ventilation pauses. They became part of the building's vocabulary, the way a house has its own language of creaks and shifts. I stopped flinching. I stopped investigating. I just absorbed them. They became part of my night, the way the buzzing fluorescents were part of my night. Background, texture, the sonic wallpaper of a place that was doing something it didn't want to explain. I need to tell you about the logbook. In the records room, on the bottom shelf of the oldest filing cabinet, the one with the dented drawer that you had to lift and pull at the same time, there was a logbook, green hardcover, no label on the spine. I found it by accident while looking for blank intake forms. It was a shift log for the East Wing, dates ranging from March 2017 to November 2019, handwritten entries, one per shift, noting patient counts, incident reports, medication rounds, staffing, standard institutional documentation. I read through it over several nights. Most of it was unremarkable. Patient stable, no incidents, medication administered per protocol, rounds completed. But in the last few months, August, September, October 2019, the entries changed. They got shorter, more repetitive. The handwriting, which had varied between several different authors in the earlier pages, narrowed to 2, then 1. The observations became almost identical from day to day. All patients accounted for, routine maintained, no incidents. All patients accounted for, routine maintained, no incidents. All patients accounted for, routine maintained, no incidents. The same sentence, night after night, in the same handwriting, with the same pen, for weeks. Then, on October 14th, 2019, a different entry, different handwriting, shakier, pressed harder into the page. Ward is quiet, too quiet. Patients are calm, but unresponsive to interaction. Staff report feeling watched. Dr. Alderman has not been on site in 11 days, despite being scheduled. Requesting review. Something is wrong with the routine. The next entry, October 15th. All patients accounted for. Routine maintained. No incidents. Same handwriting as before. The neat one, as if the entry from October 14th had never happened. The logbook continued for another 3 weeks after that. Same sentence, same hand. Then it stopped. The last entry was November 8th, 2019. After that, blank pages. I put the logbook back. I closed the drawer. I sat at my desk and listened to the fluorescence buzz and the ventilation hum and the rain tap against the windows. And I thought about what it means when a routine outlives its purpose, when the procedure continues after the reason for the procedure is gone, when the building keeps breathing after the lungs have been removed. I want to tell you what I think was happening, but I don't know what I think was happening. I have pieces. They don't form a picture. They form a feeling, a specific, textured, uncomfortable feeling, like wearing a shirt that's slightly too tight. You can function. You can go about your day, but you're always aware of it. It's always pressing against you. Here is what I know. The East Wing closed in late 2019. The official reason was budget restructuring. The unofficial reason, to the extent that anyone would discuss it, involved some kind of incident, vague, unspecified, swallowed by institutional silence, the way all uncomfortable truths are swallowed by institutions. But the wing wasn't empty. I don't mean that in a supernatural sense. I don't mean ghosts. I mean that the infrastructure of care, the lights, the heat, the charting, the intercom, the routines, was still operating. Someone was still performing the functions of a ward that officially didn't exist. Filing charts, administering medications, checking on patients, walking the halls. Patients who were no longer in the system, patients whose names appeared on handwritten charts but not in any database. Patients who, as far as the official record was concerned, had been discharged or transferred or simply ceased to exist when the wing closed. But routines don't care about official records. Routines are their own kind of life. They persist. They replicate. They continue because continuing is what they were built to do. And stopping requires a decision that no one is willing to make. I think about Denise carrying charts into the dark end of the corridor at 2 a.m. I think about the warmth behind the door of room 204E. I think about the logbook's last months, the same sentence, repeated like a prayer or a compulsion or a lie that had become indistinguishable from truth. All patients accounted for, routine maintained, no incidents. And I think about my apartment, the apartment across from mine, the vacant unit with the 3 plants on the sill, and the figure who appeared every evening at the same time, performing the same careful, precise, purposeless watering. Who were they? I never found out. I watched for months. I never saw a light turn on. I never saw a door open or close. I never saw mail delivered or trash taken out. Just the figure. Just the plants. Just the routine. One evening in February, I walked across the courtyard and into the other building. I found the apartment, 4C, 3rd floor, east facing. I knocked. No answer. I tried the knob. Locked. I pressed my ear to the door. I stood there for a long time listening. The hallway was empty. The building was quiet, except for the muffled sounds of other people's lives. A television. A child. Running water. Behind the door, I heard nothing. But when I got home and looked across the courtyard, the plants had been watered. The soil was dark and damp. The leaves were green and upright and perfect. I stopped working at Greyhaven in March. I didn't quit dramatically. I didn't confront anyone. I just stopped picking up shifts. I let the calls go to voicemail. Eventually, they stopped calling. I thought about reporting something, but I didn't know what I'd report or to whom. There was nothing to point to that couldn't be explained away. Old wiring, filing errors, building sounds, budget cuts. Every piece of evidence dissolved when you held it up to the light. The whole thing was built out of implications and textures and the spaces between what people said and what they meant. And maybe that's what disturbed me most. Not the possibility that something terrible was hidden in the east wing of a psychiatric hospital. Not the idea that patients might still be there, existing in some bureaucratic limbo, cared for by staff who had absorbed the routine so deeply that they could no longer distinguish it from normalcy. What disturbed me was how easy it was for everyone to look away, how smooth the deflections were, how practiced the silences, how naturally the institution maintained its shape around an absence that no one would name. Gerald, sipping his coffee. Denise, smiling her professional smile. Paul taking the long way to the break room. Ray mopping the floors at 4 a.m. with the steady, unhurried rhythm of a man who has decided that some things are not his responsibility to understand. They all knew, I'm sure of it. Not the details maybe, not the full picture, but the shape of it, the weight. They carried it the way I carry it now, silently, carefully, in the part of yourself that you don't show to anyone because showing it would mean admitting that something is broken and you chose to keep walking past it. I still live on Keswick Street. I still watch the apartment across from mine. The plants are still there. The figure still comes. Every evening between 6:15 and 6:45. Left plant, middle plant, right plant, pause, withdraw. Last week, something changed. There was a fourth plant. I stood at my window and counted them 3 times. 4 pots, evenly spaced on the sill. The new one was the same as the others, small, green, anonymous. It sat at the far right end, as if it had always been there. The figure appeared at 6:22, watered all 4 plants, same pace, same order, same mechanical devotion, left, middle right, right, then gone. I don't know what the 4th plant means. I don't know if it means anything. Maybe someone just added a plant. Maybe there's a simple, boring explanation for all of this, for the plants, for the east wing, for the charts and the lights and the footsteps and the log entries and the warm air behind the door. Maybe. But I've started noticing something else, something I haven't told anyone, something I'm only telling you because you're not here, and because saying it out loud might make it less heavy or might make it more real. And I don't know which of those I'm more afraid of. I've started watering my own plants at the same time. I don't have many, just 2 on my kitchen windowsill, a small fern, and something I bought at a hardware store and never learned the name of. I've had them for years. I water them when I remember, which is irregularly, sometimes every few days, sometimes once a week. But for the past month, I've been watering them every evening, between 6:15 and 6:45. Left plant, right plant, the same careful, measured motions. I don't decide to do it. I just find myself at the window, cup in hand, tilting water into the soil with a precision that doesn't feel like mine. It's such a small thing. It's such a nothing thing. It's just watering plants. But I think about what Ray said. Some places don't let go of people easy. And I think about the logbook. Routine maintained. No incidents. And I think about the figure across the courtyard, performing the same action in the same way at the same time, night after night, for reasons that may have stopped existing long ago. And I think about what it means when a routine becomes the only thing that's real, when the action replaces the reason, when you keep going through the motions because the motions are all that's left, and stopping would mean confronting the silence underneath. I water my plants every evening now. I don't know when I started. I don't know how to stop. All patience accounted for. Routine maintained. No incidents.